All right, so first of all, let's talk about absolute value. What is absolute value? It is the distance from 0 to a number, yes. So when we're looking at a number line or we're thinking about a number line, we're talking about the absolute value of a number is how far it is away from 0. So if we're talking about how far something is or the distance between something, what kind of number can it not be? Negative, okay? You can't go a negative distance. Even if I'm going backwards, I'm still going somewhere, right? So distance is always positive, meaning absolute value is always positive. So I'm going to just kind of draw a little something here. Well, actually, no, I don't. When we talk about a number and how far it is from 0. So for example, 2. 2 has an absolute value of 2. But what also has an absolute value of 2? What else is 2 units away from 0? Negative 2. So when we set equations, the first goal is to make sure our absolute value is all by itself with nothing on the outside. Okay? So that's going to be the first question I'm asking you every time. Is my absolute value all by itself? In this equation, the first one, yes. Is the absolute value of x all by itself? Yes. Okay. So I don't have to worry about getting anything away from it. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 2 equations. I keep the stuff that is inside the absolute value exactly the same, so we keep that as an x. I'm going to set it equal to 2, okay, because that's the number that is in the equation. But then you also told me what number has the same absolute value? Negative 2. So I have to set up a second equation because I could plug in a positive 2 and it would have an absolute value of 2, but I could also plug in a negative 2 and it would also have an absolute value of 2. And then what you do is if there's anything left to do to solve that equation, then we would solve it. But in this case, is there anything left for me to do here to solve? No. So guess what my 2 answers are? Yeah, both of them. You can put x equals both if you want to, or you can just put 2 and negative 2, however you want to write it, just as long as you give me both. You can put x equals 2 comma negative 2. You can just put 2 comma negative 2, or you can put x equals 2 and x equals negative 2. Okay, so again, first, make sure the absolute value is all by itself, which in this case it was. Second, set up your 2 equations. One the positive, one the negative. And then third, you solve for what's left. What about negative 2? Throwing a trigger to anybody? What did we just say absolute value can never be? Negative. So is there any number that I can substitute in for x and have an absolute value equal to negative 2? Is there anything that's a negative distance away from anything? No. So in this case, because I have my absolute value equal to a negative number, you told me that's not possible, right? Yeah. So what do you think we should say? What's the solution for x if absolute value cannot equal negative? No solution. Okay, so be very careful with that. They're going to try to trick you and have you give you an absolute value equal to a negative number. That is not ever possible because negative distances are not possible. So just keep that in mind. They will throw that out here trying to trick you. And some people will put 2 and negative 2 again. But remember, absolute value can never equal a negative. So far, so good? Okay. All right, write these 2 down. A little bit more involved, but really not much. Again, the very first question we should ask ourselves anytime we are solving an absolute value equation is my absolute value by itself? Is there anything on the outside of the absolute value bars that I need to get rid of? No. No. Okay, so I have inside my absolute values, I have t minus 3, but I don't have anything on the outside of them, so I don't have to do anything with that. We're going to keep this stuff, the stuff inside the absolute value, exactly the same. We're going to set it equal to 2, but then we always have to set up our second equation because what else can it be equal to? Negative 2. So I'm going to do the second equation as t minus 3 equals negative 2. Okay, it's always set equal to the number that they give you, as long as it's positive, and then the opposite of that. Then you're going to solve each one of those. And then that should give you your solutions. And you can always just plug it back in to make sure it works. I will take and I will add 3 on the first one. So t would equal 5. And then I can add 3 on the second one. And so t would equal what? 1. And then what I mean by checking it is if I want to go back to my original question, I can plug in each one of my numbers to make sure it makes a true statement. So for example, I can put 5 in. What's 5 minus 3?
2.
And does the absolute value of 2 equal 2? Yes. Okay, so we know that one is a true. And then we can do the same thing again for 1. I plug in 1. And this is my check. You don't have to write this stuff down. I'm just kind of showing you. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Does the absolute value of negative 2 also equal 2? Yes. So I know both of those answers are correct, and that's what I would put in my answer blank. T equals 5 and t equals 1. The biggest problem I have with absolute value equations is people forget to set up that second equation. Okay, so just remember there's always a number and its opposite that have the same absolute value. So if you will, please try number 4. If you have not already. Again, is the absolute value by itself? If yes, set up your 2 equations and solve. Just remember, if it's ever equal to a negative, absolute value equaling a negative is not possible. Okay? Not the second equation that we're setting up, because we're taking away absolute value bars. But if you ever have absolute value bars of something equal to a negative number, it's not really possible. Is my absolute value by itself in this one? Is there anything on the outside of it that I need to get rid of? No. So I'm going to take the stuff inside, again, the p plus 7. I'm going to set it equal to 3, and what else should I set it equal to? Negative 3, okay. I need that p plus 7 to have an absolute value of 3, okay, so that can also equal negative 3. And then I just go and solve each one. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. So the first one I get is p equals negative 4. And then be careful. Some people tend to take that negative 4 and put its answer second. The opposite of it, that's not true. We got to solve the equation. What's negative 3 minus 7? Negative 10. So my 2 answers are going to be negative 4, negative 10. Okay. Is everybody okay with that? This stuff's not too terribly difficult, right? Don't have to think about it like we did with compound inequalities. We just set up our 2 and solve. Try both of those. They are exactly the same. My absolute value is by itself. We will get to something else in just a minute. So we're going to take the stuff inside the absolute value bars. We're going to set them equal to the number, and then also the opposite of the number. And we're going to solve. Again, on number 5, my absolute value, the stuff inside, the 2 minus y, is by itself. So I'm going to set up my 2 equations. I'm going to leave that 2 minus y alone. I'm going to set it equal to 11, and I'm also going to set it equal to negative 11. And then I can solve. I get negative y is equal to 9. I can't leave my variables negative, so I'm going to divide through by that 1, or negative 1. And I get y equals negative 9. And then on the other side, the same thing, we're going to subtract our 2. But this time I have negative y equals negative 11 minus 2, which is negative 13. We're going to divide through by negative 1. And therefore, y is going to equal, so we get negative 9 and 13 for that one. Anybody have any questions? All right, what about 6? What 2 equations do I set up? Perfect. 5x equals 50 and 5x equals negative 50. And then I'm going to divide both sides here by 5. I get x equals 10. And I get x equals negative 10. We all good? Yeah? Okay. All right, last 2. A little bit more work here. Take a minute, write down number 7. We're going to look through it. Do you notice the difference in this one? There's something on the outside of my absolute value. So before I can set up my 2 equations, I need to get that absolute value of x plus 3 all by itself. So what would I have to do first? I'm going to add that 9 over. I need to get that 9 away to the other side. Okay, so I'm going to end up with the absolute value of x plus 3 is equal to 11. Once you have the absolute value by itself, then we can set up our 2 equations. So go ahead and finish it. Set up x plus 3 is equal to 11, and x plus 3 is equal to negative 11. Again, the absolute value must be all by itself before I can set up my 2 equations. If I set up my 2 equations first, you're going to get the wrong answer 99% of the time. There's an occasion here and there that it will still work, but not usually. All right, so let's see. X plus 3 equals 11, and x plus 3 equals negative 11. So I'm going to subtract my 3 over. So x is going to equal, what is that, 8? And then also what else? Negative 14. All right, with question number 8, I have a couple of things that are outside of the absolute value. I have the 2 that's in front of the absolute value, and I have that negative 4 that I need to get rid of that's behind it. Sometimes, and it works a lot of times, but not always, sometimes people try to distribute that 2 inside the absolute value bars. They're not parentheses. We do not want to do that, okay? So imagine if that were just 2, and then instead of the absolute value bar is x, what would you do first to get that by itself? Okay, write it down. So if I replace the absolute value stuff with just x, what would be your first step in solving that equation? You'd add 4, yeah. So we want to get rid of that 4 first. Again, I'm going to keep that 2 on the outside. I do not want to distribute it. Yes, sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. So we need to be very careful with that. We don't want to get in the habit of trying to distribute. Okay, so we would add 4, right? Then what would you do to get that x by itself? Divide by 2. Same concept here. You want to get rid of that 2 that's in front of it, not by distributing, but by dividing. So go ahead, divide both sides by 2. Then your absolute value is all alone. You can set up your 2 equations, and you can solve to find your 2 solutions. We want to get rid of the 2 first, so we're going to divide. I get the absolute value of 1 minus x is equal to 3 now. And now I'm ready for my 2 equations. 1 minus x equals 3, and 1 minus x equals negative 3. I get negative x equals 2, so I'm going to divide through, and I get x equals negative 2. And then the same thing over here. I get negative x equals negative 4, divide through by that negative 1. So what 2 answers we get? We get a negative 2 and a positive 4. Anybody have any questions?